G'day groovers, rockers, and in between. This is Vinyl Vibes. I'm your host, Jack Hodgins. Today, we are talking with the original drummer of the Ventures, General George Babbitt. George would join the Ventures in 1959 at the age of 17. In his short time in the Ventures, he would play on the group's first single. George departed from the group soon after the single was recorded due to being too young to play in clubs. Walk Don't Run would become a hit for the Ventures the year after in 1960 and would go on to make an everlasting impact in music history. George would go on to become a general in the Air Force and today is retired. G'day George, and welcome to Vinyl Vibes.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, and look, and thanks for accepting the invitation. And look, I just wanted to start at the beginning. I've read you were born in 1942 in Washington. Like, what was your childhood like growing up? Yeah.
My dad owned a small plumbing and heating company, and we lived in a modest life, but a comfortable life. I didn't do too much moving around. We lived in Tacoma, Washington. I went up through high school there. And then I went to the University of Washington in Seattle, and then I joined the Air Force. At the time, conscription was still a thing that loomed over every young man's head, and the war in Vietnam had not quite accelerated to what it would. But I knew that I was going to have to either join voluntarily or let the government decide. So I joined.
Growing up, was there much music in the house?
I played in the band. My mom felt that playing an instrument of some sort was an essential part of growing up. So she wanted me to play the piano. Looking back on it, that would have been a great decision, but I suppose partly because she wanted it, I didn't. And so I took lessons for several years, but never became proficient at it. My contact with music was about like every young teenager. I grew up in the Elvis Presley era, the late 50s. We listened and went to dances.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember hearing rock and roll for the first time? Like, does that memory stay with you at all, George?
Yeah, I think it was Elvis Presley, but that's only because I think some of the earlier stuff I didn't really associate with rock and roll. It seemed to me it was more like swing music, my parents' style of music. But the heartbeat rock and roll started, I think, with Elvis Presley, and we used to listen to that in car radios. But we had a pretty good music scene when I was in high school in Tacoma. The Wailers and the Blue Notes were successful bands that stayed around actually into the 90s, much like the Ventures.
What did your parents think of rock and roll? Do you remember what their thoughts were on it?
It was pretty typical. They didn't like it, but I'm not sure they really didn't like it. It was just what parents were supposed to say. My dad would complain about the loud noise in the bedroom when I played the drums, but then on the other hand, he was happy when I did, I guess. I had one Christmas where I remember pretty vividly my mother had been pushing me to learn an instrument, and therefore I had to pick. And my dad was assigned the job of figuring out which instrument I was going to learn to play, and he sat me down on the sofa and he said, "Son, you've got to play an instrument. Your mom wants you to do it. What have you got in mind?" And I said, "The sousaphone." And he said, "What? The sousaphone?" Yeah, I had seen that in marching bands, and I was impressed with that. And his response was, "Well, what's your second choice?" And I said, "The drums." So I think the drums were, in his mind, just as bad, but he didn't feel like he could turn me down twice. So that's how I got started playing the drums. I was 7 years old.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember what kind of drum kit your first one was? Yeah.
The first one was a Ludwig, just a small kit, had a ride cymbal, snare drum, bass drum, no toms, and no crash cymbal. And I wasn't starting in high school. I did start to play in bands, but it was kind of pickup things, not a permanent membership in a band. Bob Main was the band teacher at Lincoln High School and had been in the 30s and 40s jazz clarinetist.
Mm-hmm.
And so he formed a jazz group, and if I'd have had any sense, I'd have paid more attention because he was a good jazz artist and I could have learned a lot, but it wasn't rock and roll, so it didn't sound right to me, and I let that opportunity pass by.
Did you teach yourself to play the drums, or did you learn like to play them from someone? Like, how'd you go about that? Yeah.
Well, I learned to play in a band, a concert band.
Mm-hmm.
That was what that was the course at school. If you wanted to take music, you ended up in the band. If it was a big school, they may have had a stringed orchestra too. And then the band teacher taught little side things, like, for example, Bob Main formed a jazz group. It was a big band sound in the band, and two of my friends were in it, so I joined as the drummer. And we played at high school dances, but it didn't really work out. It was fun. I enjoyed it, probably learned some, but my friends, the people who weren't in bands, didn't like that kind of music. They wanted popular rock and roll.
And I think it was during that time that Don Wilson, Bob Bogle were getting the Ventures together, and you joined around the same time. You were 17. I think you were playing in the band. Am I right on that? The high school band, yeah.
The two of them, I didn't know Don and Bob until I was introduced to them by Don's sister, Jackie. And she lived next door to my parents, which, of course, at the time is where I lived too. Bob and Don had got the idea that they wanted to be professional musicians, and they wanted to be doing that soon. No more waiting around. So they would ask people to join them and play for a while. They asked me. Jackie recommended the kid next door. So I took my drums over to Jackie's, and Don and Bob got their 6-string guitars out. There was no bass at that time. And we played for a while, and they asked me to play at upcoming events. Like, for instance, they had a gig it was at a wedding reception. And there were others, like there's a picture floats around about a teen party at Fort Lewis. And I can remember other events that we went to. We played on a local Tacoma TV station. They set that up, and I joined them on all of those. But their goal was, and they started right away, play wherever they could make money. And that meant that clubs had to be considered, but I couldn't play in a club because I was too young. And so probably in the summer of '59, maybe a little later in fall, it became obvious to Don and Bob that I wasn't the right drummer for the future. And I understand that. And so they moved on, and I was still finishing up high school and planning to go to the University of Washington. So we parted ways in 1960, and I didn't see them again until the mid-'80s.
Were they called the Ventures when you first joined? Was the name already there?
No. Before I came, they used it as a twosome under the name of Versatones. I didn't know that at the time. I've since read it in their book of history. But Don wanted to make a recording, and they got Josie, his mother, was an active band manager. She arranged with a recording studio in Seattle, which actually the studio was in Joe Bowles' basement, and he had become well known for being a good recording studio. So we went on a Sunday to record the first record, the Real McCoys and Cookies and Coke, made as a 45, and it took us all day and half the night to get it done the way that everybody was happy with. And the name on the label, at least the name of the band, was The Ventures. So that had changed from the Versatones to The Ventures sometime before that, which was in the fall of '59.
I mean, did you have much to do with the naming of that? Or was that more the Bob and Don's kind of thing? Yeah.
If we were going to go any further with the record, they needed a name.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things at the time was a group called the Fleetwoods, and they had a couple of national hits, and they were a vocal group, two guys. And in their story that many of us have heard, they took out the phone book, and in those days there was alpha characters at the beginning of the phone address. My home phone was both sides 2027. So in Olympia, the telephone exchange was named Fleetwood. So they named themselves the Fleetwoods, and it was very successful. And so we got that in our mind, and we went through phone books. We must have looked at every name in there. And finally, I think it was Josie who said, You're already the Versatones. How about the Ventures? That's close to it. By then, I think everybody was worn down, and it sounded like a good name, and that's what they went with.
I was kind of thinking, like, when you guys recorded that, like, was that? I mean, we're talking 59 here, I think. I mean, that would have been live in the studio. Like there would have been no overdubbing of all the music. It would have just been live, right?
It was a 2-track system, if I remember this, and so you could take your most recent master and you could dub on it, but you had to save that. You had to leave the dub in the master and then record live the next track that you wanted, and he would match it up. But there was no 8-track or 16-track or whatever it is now, where the engineer could independently manage the sound along each track. There were just 2, and we did. The Real McCoys had a vocal, and Don did the singing. So it was he did the vocal in on top. But I think that means that there was no pure track. Everything was mixed when the final master was produced.
Josie Wilson was the producer. Am I right on that?
Yeah. Josie was Don's mom. Quite a lady.
From what I've read, she sounds like quite a lady. I mean, what was she like in the studio with you guys that evening when you guys were recording that single? Yeah.
I don't remember Josie staying around. That's blank in my memory. I'm not sure. I know Josie had taken the stack of records, Cookies and Coke, Real McCoy, put them in a box in the back seat of the car, and started the road trip. My guess is she went to most every radio station in Washington State, and she would DJ who was playing that kind of music, give him a copy of the record, and pitch the whole thing, the whole idea to the disc jockeys. And a lot of them did pick up on that and started playing it. I always thought it was number 1 in Boise, Idaho, but their history book says it was number 1 in Seattle. So I don't know which is right, but it was number 1 someplace. So here I am, a high school kid, and the band I'm playing in has got a number 1 record someplace. And so I was pretty proud of that. Don and Bob were hardworking. They didn't tolerate in themselves something that wasn't in their mind a quality product. So we re-recorded and re-recorded, and I thought it was a good show. But I had no experience with what would work on a record, and I was just along for the ride.
In saying that they were hardworking, I mean, I've read that they wrote those 2 songs on the single, the Real McCoy and Cookies and Cocoa. Did you ever get to witness their writing process, like at all? Yeah.
No, I never did. I didn't hear the Real McCoy and Cookies and Coke until we were at Camp Joe Bowles. We didn't play those to the best of my memory, but local dances that we went to. We did play Walk Don't Run.
When I watched the video of you guys when you reunited with them in 1998, I think it was. I think it might have been Bob that said at the beginning when he was introducing you that you had a lot to do with the arranging of their version of Walk Don't Run. Am I right on that?
Well, I was surprised when Don said that, but I think what he was talking about was before that, since I was the first drummer, the 2 of them hadn't really thought about what was the drums going to sound like. And my recollection, and I could be wrong here, my recollection was they still had in their mind almost it should be kind of a swing 6/8 time, because it came from jazz piece, Walk Don't Run, and then they adapted it to rock and roll. Well, I was a rock and roll drummer, so I wanted to play it 2/4, 4/4 beat, and so eventually the rock and roll version of it won out. The swing kind of left the song, but I don't know how that all happened or how much of that I had any influence of it. I'd like to think I did, but I was a pretty young, naive kid, so I'm not sure.
You mentioned you were playing that song when you first joined. I mean, how close was the version you guys were playing when you were in the band to the version that came out? Like, does that memory stay with you at all? Like, yeah, the difference in the versions, yeah.
The biggest difference was that they played it at a higher speed, a higher tempo, and that sounded good. I mean, it sounds good to me too. But we didn't do it at that tempo. We did it at a slower tempo. Yeah. But other than that, I think both of them had. By then, the record that came out in '61 was all rock and roll, no 6/8 time, no swing.
When you guys were playing it like in 59 and maybe early 60, I mean, how did audiences react to Walk Don't Run or just the Ventures generally? Were they pretty impressed or like, yeah, what do you remember of that? Yeah.
Well, I remember them being pretty pleased audiences now with the Venture songs. And Walk Don't Run was one of them we played at dances, and that would sometimes get calls for play it over. But there were other songs that kind of had that Dwayne Eddy twang and could be played to a rock and roll beat. There was, and we played those also. Apache, Perfidia, they were on their first albums. We played those. I'm not sure why they chose the two tracks they did for the first 45. I would, at the time, I didn't even think about it, but looking back on it, that they had much better songs than those two. And they immediately recorded them as a single and then later on as part of an album.
I mean, you've mentioned a few times you guys were playing local dances, and I was kind of thinking, like, back in the late 50s, what were those local dances like? Like, paint me a picture for that, yeah.
Well, some of them were pretty good, since high school kids or just out of high school kids didn't like to drive long distance. Well, certainly couldn't afford a hotel. So if you were going to play in Seattle and you were from Tacoma, you drove 30 miles in tough traffic and then came home after the dance to get some sleep. So I always thought that was the reason the bands tend to they had their most popular audiences were in their local area. Seattle bands, Tacoma bands, Olympia bands, that they were, the Wailers may be a good example. They played a type of blues with a hard rock and roll beat.
Mm-hmm.
They were showmen. And now the Ventures weren't initially showmen. That was something that came along, I think, beginning in the 60s. The Ventures weren't as much showmen, I didn't think, as the Wailers. But those were bands that had flashy matching suits. They moved around, jumped around. They were what they were, and it was in the later 60s just something that increasingly became important for bands to be able to catch people's eyes.
When you were playing with them in the late 50s, like, did you have any idea that they would go on to have such an impact? Was there any, like, sign to you at that time? Yeah.
No, not at all. No, by the time they put that first 45 out with the first one after the one I was on, and that went national, I think first or second. That was amazing. I couldn't believe it. And then later on, their albums started to sell, and they were in California, and I didn't keep up with them or have any way to keep up with them, I thought at the time. No, I didn't anticipate that they would have the success that they do, but that wasn't because I didn't think they were good. It's just I didn't know anybody that kind of success before the Ventures.
Early 1960, you left the group. I mean, that was because of you couldn't play at nightclubs. Am I right on that?
That's the way I remember it, yeah. I think my parents were involved in this. When Don and Bob wanted to make a record, they found out it cost quite a bit of money to make a record. And so I think Josie approached my mom and dad to see if they would be willing to invest in the band. Now, I may be making this up, but that's this. I'm telling you what I think may have happened. So the first record, did sell, but it didn't make anybody any money. And they were planning to move on, and they needed a drummer probably a better drummer, but they also needed a drummer that would live the lifestyle that they were going to be living. I think there was a negotiation between my parents and Josie to say, okay, well, here we'll go our separate ways, and me, George, won't play in the band anymore, and he'll be off at college. And that just was never talked about, and I didn't know any more about it than that. My parents saw me as not mature enough and old enough to do those kinds of negotiations.
Do you remember your last gig, like your last concert with the Ventures? Like, does that memory stay with you before all that happened? Yeah.
Well, there's a picture. In fact, I've got it in front of me here. It's got the three of us from what I considered the ventures, and then 2 add-ons. And it was at Fort Lewis Teen Club in December 1959, New Year's Eve. That may have been the last time I played with them, but I'm not sure.
Had they have recorded Walk Don't Run the first, like the first single, obviously it would have been very different. I mean, would you have stayed with them? Like, had it been a success? Like, do you think you still would have been playing with them up till today, or whatever happened? Yeah.
I don't think I would have. I think I never had to face up to it, but I really wasn't the drummer that they needed. They needed somebody that was as good as they were, although I could hold a beat. I didn't have I just didn't know how to do the things that needed to be done on the drums to make the band successful. So I would say I kind of reached the peak of my ability, and there was no point sticking around. If I had been given a chance, I think I'd have had a tough battle with my parents. They saw me. They would have seen me giving up on an opportunity to go to college. I think they would have won the battle.
I think it was like spring 1960, so Walk Don't Run had come out, and you see Bob and Don on American Bandstand, and at the time you were pretty not happy about missing your chance at the time at 17. I mean,
sure.
Take me through that moment, turning on American Bandstand and seeing them, yeah.
Well, that was a lot of us would come home after high school and turn on American Bandstand, and I did, and I enjoyed watching it. And then I had no advance notice of this. I'm watching it one day, and they introduced the Ventures, and I thought, well, holy smokes, is that the same Ventures I know? And it was. And so you can imagine I was really disappointed. I thought my life had come to an end. I missed my chance, but I didn't miss my chance. It's just an interesting outcome. But I had a good time for about a year playing with them. It ended the best way possible. Everybody happy. The Ventures did well, amazingly well, and I went off and had a career elsewhere and did well enough that I'm pretty happy too.
Of course, I mean, you went on to have a fantastic career in the United States Air Force. I mean, tell me a bit about it, yeah, like about how you got into it, about your time in it, like, yeah.
As I mentioned to you earlier, the conscription was active at the time, so I had a choice. I could either wait and be drafted, or I could join through the Reserve Officer Training Program, ROTC, and then study while I'm in school for the Air Force, and then be commissioned when I finished my degree. And that's what I chose. As soon as I graduated, my obligation was to head off to technical training. And then my first assignment in the Air Force was in England for 3.5 years, which turned out to be a great experience for both my wife and myself. And then while doing that, the Air Force, in its clever ways, offered me an opportunity to get a master's degree at their expense. And so that was another offer too good to turn down. And by then I was committed by saying yes to so many things like that. I had a commitment to stay with the Air Force. And I did. I stayed for 35 years. Actually, it was in the 80s I made recontact with Don and Bob. My wife had been looking at the newspaper, the Washington Post, in the entertainment section that said the Ventures were coming to town. They were going to play in a place called the Bayou in Georgetown, not far from the Key Bridge. And so, what the heck, we bought tickets, and I gave a note written on a napkin to one of the waiters and asked him to give it to Don. And after the show, we went upstairs and waited outside their dressing room, and we had a reunion after 27 years, which was a lot of fun. And my wife was pleased with it. The Ventures always had a big fan club. It seemed like wherever they went. And in this case, Louise and I thought we were just intruding, and we didn't want to make a bother of ourselves. But while I'm inside saying hello to Don and Bob, she's been asked by some of the people that are part of the fan club, who are you? And she told the story. My husband's George Babbitt, and he was the first drummer for the venture. Well, it turns out they knew that.
Wow.
They'd never met me. They knew that a guy named George Babbitt had been the first drummer, and she was surprised and pleased with that. And the next day, they played at George Washington University, an outside concert, so we decided to go to that too. That was the first time we got back together in 1987. And then in 1997, the Ventures were invited to the opening of the exhibit at the Smithsonian Institute on the origins of the electric guitar. Don called me up and said, "You and Louise want to go with us?" We were already in Washington, D.C. They had to fly in. So, of course, we said yes. And then the year after that is when they played with the Air Force Band.
What was that like performing with them again? That must have been a great moment for you.
It was certainly fun. I didn't know what to expect. Well, that's not totally true. The Air Force Band has a guest artist series. The guest artist series it may still be done, 8 Sundays in the winter. The Air Force Band invites on each Sunday a guest artist, somebody that has name recognition and would be a good show. And they play with the full orchestra of the Air Force Band. And the arrangers of the Air Force Band, this is the compensation, take that artist's music and write a full set of music for full orchestra. And for most bands, that's a valuable piece because depending on what backup might be available, they can pick and choose from these scores. And studio drummers, studio musicians of any type can play it right along with them. So that's how it worked. And my wife happened to be a volunteer in the public affairs department at the Air Force Band in Washington, D.C. So Chief Daisy Jackson was in charge, and she was looking for the next season's 8 musicians, guest artists. And in the discussion, my wife mentioned that I played with the Ventures. Well, that started it, and Chief was the power behind all of this stuff, and she decided she wouldn't take no for an answer. So I ended up obliged to wear my uniform for Constitution Hall and play Walk, Don't Run with the Ventures.
Were you proud that you had played with the Ventures, and like were you always happy to share that with people? Like was that something you were proud of, like over the years? Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And it seemed like not so much in the early days, not that I had any feelings of not wanting to talk about my involvement, but it just, I don't know why, it just never came up. But later on, once the word started to get around, people would sometimes introduce me as the guy who played drums with the Ventures. So I did develop a routine on how to handle all of that, and I enjoyed it. Obviously, it was fun to be a part of that crew.
Do you have any favorite Ventures songs or albums since your time with them? Like, did you continue to listen to them afterwards?
I didn't much. I have several of their albums. I did buy them, and they gave me others, and I have played them when you still played vinyls, and some of them I guess I still have. I have them CDs, but I didn't follow the music all that much. I'm glad they're not here to hear me say that.
Are you still playing drums today, George? Do you still like get on the drum kit and have a play of it, or yeah?
I've got a set of electronic drums, and that helps with the noise control. We just moved about 9 months ago. I've got them set up in my den, but I haven't gotten back to hitting them yet. So that's something that's on my list of things to do. I used to just sit in there sometimes and play a groove or practice a riff or something like that, and I enjoy that. But I just haven't gotten back at it. I got to do it. I can see them from here; they're calling to me.
What's next for you, George? Like, are you like in life and in drumming? I mean, like, what's next for you?
Well, I'm 81 years old, 81 and a half. I intend to keep banging on those electronic drums, but just for my own enjoyment. I can put the headset on. Nobody else has to listen. I don't have any plans to join a band or do anything with a band. I had a chance, and it was a good one, and I enjoyed every minute of that year, 1959, time with the Ventures. But that's over.
Well, George, I just want to thank you for making the time today. This has been it's been a great experience to me to be able to talk to you about this. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm happy to do it. I hope your listeners enjoy the Ventures.
That was General George Babbitt, original drummer of the Ventures. Remember to share this show with other music fans. And if you really like what you heard today, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Vinyl Vibes. And to all you music lovers out there, stay groovy.